Let's make Africa the tree of life. Let's make Africa the tree of life.
Hello, welcome to Josh Moment. So if you are new to the channel, this channel talks about Africa's history. And in today's episode, we're looking at an ancient city or ancient kingdom or ancient empire known as Timbuktu. So before we start today's episode, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video. So without further talk, let's start today's episode. And our topic for today is Timbuktu, an ancient city which played a very key and vital role during the trans-Saharan slave trade. So let's start today's episode. So the name Timbuktu has for centuries been a popular term in Western imagination, synonymous with a distant, isolated, and mythical place, a symbol of back or beyond. This perception, however, stands in stark contrast to its historical reality. So for over 600 years, Timbuktu was a pivotal, highly connected hub of commerce and scholarship known throughout Africa, the Middle East, and even beyond. The enduring myth of its remoteness arose not from its intrinsic nature, but from the specific circumstance of European exploration and a fundamental shift in global trade. While European explorers struggled to reach the city until the 19th century due to the odious Saharan desert and hostile coastal middlemen, Timbuktu had already been a thriving cultural and commercial crossroad for centuries. Its fabled reputation in Europe was based on rumors of immense wealth, particularly in gold. Yet, the West African proverb of the era offers a more accurate perspective on the city's true value. So it says, salt comes from the north and gold from the south, and silver from the country of the white men. But the word of God and the treasure of wisdom are only to be found in Timbuktu. This saying encapsulates a central theme of Timbuktu's history. Its greatest and most enduring treasure was intellectual and spiritual, not material. This presentation systematically deconstructs the European-centric myth of Timbuktu by synthesizing historical chronicles, modern scholarships, and archaeological and architectural evidence to provide a holistic and in-depth analysis of its full history. So this analysis will trace the interwoven relationship between Timbuktu's unique geography, its dynamic trade network, its profound intellectual life, and its resilient social structure, revealing a city whose significance was far grander and more complex than the popular imagination has allowed. So let's look at the origins and ascendancy of Timbuktu. So Timbuktu's beginning was not a singular top-down event, but an organic process driven by its unique geography. So the strategic location of Timbuktu played a key role to it becoming a major hub during the trans-Saharan slave trade. So let's continue. So founded around 1100 AD by the Tuareg nomads, it began as a simple seasonal camp used for storing goods, such as salt, away from the Niger River's annual floods. The city's name is said to be derived from a local story about a woman named Buktu, who was left to oversee a well at the camp, leading to the name. Okay, so the name of the well was Tin. So this led to the name Timbuktu, or Well of Buktu. The location proved to be exceptionally strategic, at the very edge of the Sahara Desert and just miles north of the Niger River. This position made it the first major stop for trans-Saharan caravans traveling south from the Mediterranean basin and the crucial jump-off place for caravans heading north across the desert. It was a necessary node in a vast complementary trade network linking the economies of sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. The Niger River provided an easy pathway for transporting goods to and from the more tropical regions of West Africa. While the desert was the source of highly valuable salt, the city's rapid growth from a seasonal camp to a permanent settlement was a direct function of its environmental and its role as a key intermediary in the beckoning trade or in the beckoning trans-Saharan trade. So Timbuktu's commercial power was built on its role as a central marketplace for the trans-Saharan trade, like we said earlier. The city grew wealthy as a middle trader, facilitating the exchange of valuable commodities. The primary trade was the exchange of gold, slaves, and ivory from the interior of Africa for salt and other manufactured goods from the north of Africa. So gold was particularly important commodity, especially after the discovery of the Black Volta and Akan Forest gold field. Akan Forest gold field. Rock wheat. Okay, so rock salt from the Sahara was also highly valued and was often traded almost weight for weight with gold. So rock salt were exchanged for gold way back the days of Timbuktu. So if one had gold and they needed salt, they then exchanged their gold for salt based on the weight each had. So let's continue. So the profitability of this trade is underscored by the fact that a 90-kilo block of salt could double its value after being transported from Timbuktu to Guinea. So moving a commodity from Timbuktu to other places, in this case Guinea, could triple or could increase the cost, considering the cost at Timbuktu may be inflated when it is taken to other parts of the African state way back then. So let's continue. Becoming worth around 450 grams of gold. So 90 kilo, yes, so 90 kilo block of salt could double its value to 450 grams of gold. So let's continue. Other goods traded included textiles, horses, glassware, weapons, and kola nuts. The sheer scale of this ancient global trade network was a marvel of organization, with some camel caravans reaching as many as 12,000 ships of the desert. That was how profitable this trade was, demonstrating the impressive flow of goods and people through Timbuktu. So let's look at the golden age and the intellectual and spiritual flourishing of this city. So this happened from somewhere around 1300 to 1591. So Timbuktu's prosperity began in earnest when it was incorporated into the Mali Empire in the 14th century. So the city gained international fame during the reign of Mansa Musa, regarded as the richest man in history, a distinguished Malian sultan. His legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 or in the 14th century showcased Mali's immense wealth, with rumors spreading throughout Europe and the Islamic world of a king traveling with 60,000 men or 60,000 servants and so much gold that its value in Cairo dropped drastically. This pilgrimage attracted scholars and architects who were then recruited to Timbuktu. helping to transform it into a major Islamic center of learning. Mansa Musa is credited with building the Great Mosque, the Jingareba. Yes. So he built the Great Mosque known as the Jingareba, and a royal residence, laying the foundation for the city's intellectual rise. However, the city's true golden age was not of material good, but of scholarship. Flourishing under the Songhai Empire and the Askia dynasty from the 15th century to the 16th century, under rulers like Askia Muhammad, who was a great patron of scholars, Timbuktu became a major intellectual and spiritual capital. This period was a golden age for African Muslims, particularly scholars and librarians, who enjoyed a culture that deeply valued learning and intellectual pursuit. The academic life of Timbuktu was centered around a unique decentralized education system way back the 14th century. This is Africa we are talking about. Anyway, let's continue. The term University of Sankore, for example, is a modern designation for a network of independent schools. Way back in the 14th centuries, we're talking about University of Sankore based in Africa. But let's look at this description of the nature of this university that was based in Sankore during the era of Timbuktu. So the term University of Sankore, for example, is a modern designation for a network of independent schools or madrasas centered around the Sankore Mosque and other learning centers. So it wasn't more of a station at one place, but then they were stationed at various vantage points. So let's continue to get to know more about it. So this system was not a centralized institution, like I said earlier, but rather a collection of schools, each supervised by an independent scholar or ulema. The academic structure was based on a personalized apprenticeship style relationship between a student and a single teacher. A mentorship that could last for up to 10 years. This decentralized apprentice-based model necessitated the creation of extensive private libraries. Scholars like Ahmad Baba, one of Timbuktu's most celebrated figures, amassed vast collection of manuscripts, with his personal library of over 1,600 volumes of manuscripts. And who is being considered one of the smaller collection among the city's scholarly elite. Anyway, let's continue. These personal and familiar collections serve as the primary center of learning and scholarship in Timbuktu. Students themselves played a vital role in this intellectual ecosystem. What were they doing? They were copying manuscripts for a living to finance their studies and ensure the preservation and the proliferation of knowledge, to ensure the rapid increase of knowledge in Timbuktu during the 14th century. This dedication to the written word and the familiar and personal curation of knowledge was the true engine of Timbuktu's intellectual golden age. The city's most famous and long-lasting contribution to civilization is its scholarship and the hundreds of thousands of manuscripts that were copied there. The subject covered in these manuscripts span an incredible range, extending far beyond religious texts to include works on history, law, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine. This is the 14th century you're talking about, and this is Africa in Timbuktu, 14th century. Anyway, let's continue. The intellectual depth is evident in the documentation of a 16th century or 1593 meteor Detailed discussion on matters like polygamy and money lending, and even a legal treaty on slavery that uh, argued for freedom as a fundamental human right. The sheer volume and varied content of these documents fundamentally challenge the historical misconception of pre-colonial Africa as a continent without written history or scientific achievement. Way back 14th centuries, Africans were recording manuscripts regarding history, law, astronomy, medicine, and all that. Let's continue. The manuscripts are not just religious texts, but comprehensive records of a sophisticated society that engage in a high level of intellectual and scientific inquiry, proving that Timbuktu's cultural and scholarly contributions were vital to the wider Islamic and world civilization. So let's look at the makeup of Timbuktu, or the social and cultural structure of Timbuktu. So Timbuktu was a dynamic and cosmopolitan city, a true tapestry of people and ideas. Although founded by the Tuareg, its population was a mixture or mixed society of Tuaregs, Arabs from the Saharan oasis, Soninke merchants, Songhai conquerors, and Fulani pastoralists. The city's social structure was profoundly altered with the introduction of Islam. While the Mali and Songhai empires were politically influential, it was the scholarly class that rose to a position of profound leadership and authority in Timbuktu, managing public and administrative affairs and becoming respected notables within the social hierarchy. So it wasn't anybody who could rise to prominence. You have to be well versed in knowledge to be regarded as a leader in Timbuktu in the 14th century Africa. Anyway, let's continue. The city's ethnic diversity, particularly among its mercantile and scholarly elite, led to the development of a unique societal structure where knowledge and learning rather than kinship were the primary drivers of prestige. This is Africa. Anyway, let's continue. Timbuktu's religious heritage is defined as a humanist and enlightened form of Islam that valued tolerance, respect, and dialogue. This tradition, passed down through its great scholars and texts, actively promoted understanding of other religion over fanatism or ignorance. So these were not people that were caught in the web of religion. They explored it all. Let's continue. The city was a place of dialogue and religious cohabitation, historically welcoming and integrating religious leaders from other faiths, including Christian missionaries and Moroccan rabbis. A powerful example of this tolerance is found in a letter written by the scholar Ahmed al-Bakai al-Kunti in the mid-19th century. In this letter, this scholar, Ahmed al-Bakai al-Kunti, pleaded against an emir's order to execute Heinrich Bath, a Christian German explorer who had been discovered in the city of Timbuktu. And what was this scholar's argument to the emir then? So Al-Kunti argued that Islamic law did not justify killing a Christian who had not come in war. So being a Christian did not mean they were to kill him, but then if he had come to cause chaos, then they could have. But then since he didn't come with the intention to cause chaos, this scholar was pleading on his behalf. Let's continue. and that Muslims had a duty to protect him. This historical tradition of religious pluralism and intellectual debate stands in direct contradiction to the ideological motivations of the extremists who attacked the city in 2012, highlighting that the modern conflict was an attack not just on the place but on a historical and intellectual tradition antithetical to the extremists' own belief. So way back in 2012, a group of Islamic extremists attacked Timbuktu. So that was what we just spoke about. So let's continue. The city's architecture is a distinct subset of the Sudano-Sahelian style, built primarily from local sand-baked mud brick known as ferry. The three great mosques, Jin Jingareba, Sankore, and Sidi Yaya are exceptional examples of this style, which relies on local ethnic material and traditional community-based maintenance technique. This architecture approach is not merely a stylistic choice, it's a direct reflection of the city's social and environmental relationship. The buildings, including domestic houses and warehouses are constructed with mud brick that possesses effective thermodynamic qualities, allowing them to absorb heat during the day and radiate it back into the interior at night. Wow, 14th century Africa. A trademark feature of this style is the protruding wood beams, which serve as permanent scaffolding for the annual community event of replastering the mosque known as okay, so most of the time when you look at these ancient African buildings, you see some wood in them. So these were served as scaffold in order to be able to do the annual plastering. So that was basically the essence of those wood you find in the ancient mud buildings of Africa. And a notable example in Ghana, West Africa, is the Larabanga Mosque in northern Ghana. Anyway, let's continue. So this communal act of maintenance demonstrates a living heritage where the community survival is intertwined with the preservation of its physical and spiritual identity. The architecture of Timbuktu is therefore a social practice, embodying the interdependency and resilience of its people. So having heard all these nice things about Timbuktu, now there's no Timbuktu. So let's look at how Timbuktu was invaded and the fall of this great African city during the trans-Saharan trade. So let's look at the invasion of Timbuktu. So this happened somewhere in the 16th century to the 19th century. So Timbuktu's decline was not caused by a single event, but a confluence of political and economic forces that created a perfect storm of collapse. By the late 16th century, the Songhai Empire, weakened by internal political strife and infighting among the Askia dynasty, was vulnerable to external attack. In the 16th century of 1591, a Moroccan army, motivated by a desire to seize control of the trans-Saharan gold trade and salt trade, launched an invasion on Timbuktu, which is in 1591 of the 16th century. This military force, led by Judah Pasha, was armed with superior European firearms and cannons, technologies that the Songhai military lacked, leading to a decisive defeat at the Battle of DB. The immediate consequences of the invasion was catastrophic for Timbuktu. So Moroccan troops sacked and looted the city, and thousands of its inhabitants were taken as slaves. Critically, the invasion was more than a change of power. It was the intentional destruction of the city's intellectual infrastructure. The new Moroccan rulers systematically targeted Timbuktu's scholarly class. Why? Because they were the ones who were ruling then Timbuktu, with many scholars executed and some were exiled to Morocco or imprisoned on accusations of seditions. Wow. The mass removal and movement of these scholars effectively dissipated the city's culture of learning, ending its notable scholarly history and marking the beginning of an irreversible decline. The act of intellectual suppression, rather than the simple conquest of territory, was the decisive factor in the city's irreversible decline. So the attack was mainly on the scholars. It made it difficult for Timbuktu to become the Timbuktu it used to be during the 14th century or the 15th century when they were at their peak. So the act of intellectual suppression rather than the simple conquest of a territory was the decisive factor in the city's irreversible decline. In a parallel economic shift, Timbuktu's commercial importance was also being undermined by a long-term secular change in global trade routes. So let's look at this global trade route that also aided the decline of Timbuktu. And I know your guess may be as good as mine. Anyway, let's all continue and look at this or find out this global or new global trade that also played a key role in the decline of Timbuktu. So beginning in the 16th century, European powers, particularly the Portuguese, began establishing sea-based trade routes along the Atlantic coast of West Africa. This new Atlantic-oriented based commerce was more efficient and bypassed the trans-Saharan trade. That had been the lifeboat or the lifeblood of Timbuktu. The Moroccan invasion violently ended the city's intellectual and political heights, while the long-term shift in the global trade route rendered its strategic location obsolete. So this meant was the introduction of the transatlantic slave trade by the Portuguese in the 16th century eventually rendered the city of Timbuktu obsolete, even amidst the invasion by the Moroccan army. Even if they had not invaded, once the Portuguese had begun the transatlantic slave trade, it meant the gradual decline of Timbuktu. Anyway, let's continue. This dual pronged blow led to a long period of stagnation and obscurity, a fall from grandeur that would make it appear remote to the very European explorers who would later discovered it or who would later discover it. So before the Europeans discovered Timbuktu, Timbuktu had risen and fallen. So to them, Timbuktu was some remote place, or known to them, it was a major trading hub during the trans-Saharan trade caravan. Anyway, let's continue. So let's look at the legacies or some of the enduring legacies of Timbuktu. and the modern challenges the city faces now. So in modern times, Timbuktu remains an impoverished city, plagued by a range of threats to its cultural heritage. It faces the long-term existential threat of desertification. Don't forget the location of Timbuktu was at the edge of the Saharan desert, with encroaching sun physically damaging its historical monument and compromising the urban fabric. Rampant urbanization and a lack of maintenance also endanger a traditional earthen architecture, with new contemporary structures breaching the original layout and the scale of the city's traditional buildings. The city's cultural heritage suffered a catastrophic intentional attack in 2012. So let's look at this intentional attack that was launched in the city of Timbuktu in 2012. When Islamic extremists linked to Al-Qaeda invaded and occupied northern Mali. Don't forget, Timbuktu is located in modern-day Mali. During this occupation, they systematically destroyed religious and historical monuments and threatened the city's intellectual legacy, citing a militant and intolerant interpretation of Islamic law. They used pickaxes and hoes to destroy nine of the city's 16 mausoleums and 2 historical monuments, including 2 tombs of the Jingariba Mosque. So this attack was what he spoke about initially in the presentation. So they also burnt thousands of ancient manuscripts at the Ahmed Baba Institute, viewing the city's tolerant and humanist intellectual tradition as a threat to their own ideology. In a powerful testament to the city's deep-seated cultural reverence, local custodians and citizens organized a clandestine or secret heroic rescue mission to save the manuscript or to save some of the manuscript from destruction. And what did they do? Let's look at what they did. Led by librarians Abdel Kader Haidara, the population organized around the NGO Savama DCI and were able to smuggle some of these manuscripts, and they were able to smuggle about 350,000 manuscripts out of the city under the cover of darkness, risking their life to protect these manuscripts. Using rice sacks, donkey carts, motorcycle, and boats, they transferred or transported these precious artifacts to the relatively safer places of the Malian capital city, Bamako, saving over 90, defending or saving over 90% of the collection. So even though some were destroyed, they were able to rescue 90% of these manuscripts or ancient Timbuktu manuscripts. So the heroic rescue demonstrates that Timbuktu's legacy is not a static historical artifact, but a living tradition of dedication and perseverance. An act that proves that the intellectual and cultural heritage of Timbuktu is an intrinsic part of its people. So today, restoration efforts are underway. UNESCO, in partnership with local communities and under the supervision of local masons, has initiated the reconstruction of the destroyed mausoleums. The local families of Timbuktu are considered the custodians of the mausoleums, and their involvement in the restoration effort underscores the preservation of these sites is not merely about rebuilding stone but maintaining the cultural and social fabric of the city itself. This ongoing community-led effort proved that the intellectual and cultural heritage of Timbuktu is an intrinsic part of its people, a living story that underscores the vital importance of preserving culture and knowledge against all odds. So in conclusion, the history of Timbuktu is a remarkable trajectory of the rise, decline, and enduring resilience. It began as a practical nomad camp. Its existence and rapid growth was a direct function of its strategic geography, mainly at the edge of the Sahara. And then it transformed into an intellectual and commercial capital under the patronage of the Mali and Songhai empires, becoming a city of books way back 14th, 15th century Africa, where knowledge was considered a greater treasure than gold. Even though there was gold, but the knowledge was way, 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 way precious to the people of Timbuktu than gold. The decentralized academic system centered on private family libraries and a humanist tolerant form of Islam, unlike some extremists today. Anyway, let's continue. Produced a vast collection of manuscripts that fundamentally challenge historical narrative of pre-colonial Africa. To some, Africa never had a history. This is just 14th century Timbuktu. Way back, there has been ancient Egypt. Anyway, we will look at that in some of the coming episodes. But today's focus is Timbuktu. Let's continue. So the city's long decline was the result of the dual pronged blow, a violent military invasion in 1591 by the Moroccan army, which intentionally targeted its intellectual class, coupled with the fundamental shift in global trade to a new trade, the transatlantic slave trade, that rendered its strategic location obsolete. So once the trans-Saharan trade was replaced by the transatlantic slave trade, the location didn't matter. Timbuktu became obsolete, leading to its decline. However, Timbuktu's story does not end with its fall from grandeur. Its modern history, marked by the heroic rescue of its manuscript by local custodians and the community-led restoration of its mosques and mausoleums, demonstrate that its legacy is not a static historical relic, but a living tradition of dedication and perseverance. The city's true and most valuable legacy is not its mythical material wealth, but its profound intellectual tradition, its tolerance and humanist form of Islam, and diversity. Even though there was abundance of wealth because of the trans-Saharan trade, but they prioritized knowledge over wealth. Timbuktu's history is a microcosm of human triumph and tragedy, a living story that underscores the vital importance of preserving culture and knowledge. That underscores the importance of preserving culture and knowledge against all odds. Anyway, so we end today's episode here. And if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video. But before we go, don't forget, one day our lives will become history. What will posterity say about you? See you in the next episode.